Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have Eliza Jane Brazier. She's going to be discussing her brand new book, Good Rich People. And she's signed a batch of copies for us. Let's see here. Yeah, very stylish signature there, like that. And our friend May Cobb, author of The Hunting Wives. I still have just a few of these signed books left in stock too, has agreed to come in and do the heavy lifting with the interview tonight. So, and Barbara's tuning in from her home office there, as always. And so I'm largely going to be behind the scenes, you'll be pleased to know. And but I'll be monitoring the comments and questions field on YouTube and Facebook. So if you have any questions for Eliza or May, go ahead and put them in anytime throughout the hour. And Barbara will summon me back in, 10 or 15 minutes before the end of the hour to ask any questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Patrick. I would mention that May's book, The Hunting Wives, is coming out in paperback very soon. So if you prefer a paperback, you'll have an opportunity to read it. So ladies, it's really a pleasure to see you. I am in a feeble effort to, be edgy, and because this is an edgy, intense psychological thriller, wearing my Picasso jacket. I wish you could really see it because it's incredibly cool, which I bought in Sausalito in like 1975 or something. And amazingly, 1970 fashions are coming back. Have any of you noticed that the bell-bottom trousers are reappearing and all? So it just proves if you hang on to your clothes long enough, you can come back into style. I love it. Anyway, I think that this is a book that reminds me that we have a younger generation of writers and readers, of whom I am not one, that have come along. And so I think it's really good for me to read books that push me a little. And I think that Eliza Jane's book, The Good Rich People, has done that. And I will just make a comment from the Starred Review in Publishers Weekly that reinforces my point. Lila Herschel, the principal narrator, suffers from boredom as does her super wealthy husband, Graham, with whom she lives in a grand house perched on a cliff in the Hollywood Hills. This has been described by Publishers Weekly as a fiendish psychological thriller. And they go on to say that Brazier plays delicious homage to Richard Connell's The Most Dangerous Game, and Nathaniel West's The Day of the Locust, as the action builds to a climatic, out of control 30th birthday party. So I'm going to let May and Eliza Jane tell you all about that. What fun you must have had writing this book.
Oh yeah, you bet I did. Maybe too much fun.
No, I don't think you could ever have too much fun. And I think if you've had, bags of fun, then the reader does too. So May, since you have agreed to do this, I'm going to assume that you too had fun, or otherwise you'd have found an excuse not to be here.
I can't say enough about this book. I find it to be so fresh and cutting edge, and it's really hard, I think, in a crowded thriller marketplace to stand apart. But Elijah's voice is so stunning and different and bold and brave. And like her first book, If I Disappear, this is another groundbreaking book, and it's so deliciously twisted and dark. And Elijah, I guess the first thing I'd like to ask you is, when did you come up with the idea, and also how? And the type.
So, it's kind of like a combination of, I would say, like a few things. But the primary thing that was sort of like inspired me and really drove me to want to write this is, and I've talked to you about this before, but I basically lived below the poverty line for 10 years with my late husband in London. And so that gave me, I guess, kind of a lot of sort of different experiences that I wanted to talk about. So you see those experiences kind of fictionalized in the book through Demi's backstory. So that kind of drove me to really want to talk about this. But so also during that time, my late husband was a musician. So we would go to he'd go play gigs at these super fancy houses in London, which the London, wealthy sort of, it's a very international sort of wealthy, where you the last names of people are brands that you use, right? It's just freaking crazy.
Yeah.
So we'd go to these houses, literally, we went to this one house where you walk in and it was the lobby of the house. I don't even know. It was the lobby of a Vegas hotel, right? and every single one of their cupboards in their kitchen like was filled with Moe. So I don't know if they were like sponsored by them or what, but like literally like the fridge, like you'd open every cupboard, like to the point where it was like ridiculous, right? So that kind of makes like an appearance in the book a little bit.
Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, so it's just like that kind of contrast of like being in that kind of position and being around those people and the way that we all interacted. Like sometimes we would be at the wealthy person's house, other times they'd be at our place, and it'd be like for them, like this is like the poverty experience. You know what I mean? Like it's just a very interesting world that we live in.
Yeah.
It was just like the two extremes. And then also when I wrote this book, I was living in the Hollywood Hills, which you lived in LA, right?
Yes, in Beechwood Canyon, where you
Yeah,
said
it's
this was
really
set.
the same
Yeah.
place. So like this book was originally called Beechwood Canyon, and I was living in a duplex at that time, and I literally was living in like the lower level, like this sort of dark, kind of like slightly creepy, but it was also the nicest place I'd ever lived. And then above me was this really nice house where this couple lived. So yeah, it was like those kind of things all came together. But so I kind of wanted, I know I said this to you before, but I kind of wanted to do this like a little bit like a conversation.
Yeah.
So May's book, The Hunting Wives, is absolutely incredible. Like she's one of like, you're one of the authors, I'm saying you're one of like the authors that really like inspires me, because I feel like it's so hard, I think right now in just writing books, to be really fearless and to like take risks, because it's like we're constantly kind of second guessing ourselves or worrying like, am I pushing this too far? Like, is it too much? And you really like just have fun. And I think it's so inspiring, because I feel like when I like write, like especially when I write first drafts, I'm so afraid to have a character make a mistake, because I'm like, no one's gonna like them then, you know what I mean? So can you talk a little bit about, well, would you prefer to talk about The Hunting Wives, or do you want to talk about your next book, which is Sweet, wait, God, Darlings?
You're so sweet, my summer darlings. Yeah. We can talk about either. Like The Hunting Wives is kind of a little bit like Good Rich People, because it's got the super elite, evil people. And first of all, I just thank you. Oh my God. I'm telling you, I'm rereading Good Rich People, and I'm like, it's inspiring me to try to, do everything you just said, which is have fun, be bold. And so anyway, I know you want to ask me about The Hunting Wives, and we will, I promise, talk about it. But I love how you did the unlikable female characters in this book, because even though they're unlikable, you do root for them. I mean, even Lila, because she's an outsider, in her own home and in her marriage, and then Demi with her story of, being homeless or whatever. I mean, you really are totally transfixed by these people. They're not off-putting in a way that maybe The Hunting Wives off-put some people. You did something really special where you can relate to them,
So this is like a big theme, I would say, in your work. So is writing these unlikable women. I feel like you talk about this a lot online. So why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, I really just when I wrote The Hunting Wives, I wasn't setting out on some mission. I just find mean girls fascinating and fun, like the movie Heathers. And to me, it's just really fun and dark. And then when there was some, a little bit of clapback, a little bit on Goodreads about how despicable my characters were, I just suddenly felt fiercely protective over them, especially the main character, Sophie, because sure, she makes some mistakes, but it's like people can't take the fact that she's the one in the marriage that's stepping out, and her husband's not bad or anything. It's just her own issues. So I think it's fascinating that when it's the male in fiction, they can totally have the affair, because it doesn't even have to be a reason. Like the other person's hot, but when it's the woman, she's like demonized. And I was kind of stunned by some of the response to it. So now I'm just very outspoken about it.
Which is awesome. I mean, I feel like it's such a problem. I was having a conversation today with like my writing group, and like I think romance writers also get this a lot, where like the woman is always disliked. And one of the authors was pointing out how every time the people will say, oh, I don't like, this female character, but I do like the guy. Like they always always make sure to say he's great. Like he's described as being really hot. I don't know what it is about him, but I really like him.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so interesting, and I think it's so dangerous. I'm like, let these women be complicated and messy and bad and
Human.
devious. Yeah.
Like a
Yes, human.
right?
Exactly. Like yours, you know. I mean, I feel like you pulled that off so well though, because you genuinely are rooting for both of them
Well,
for
thank you.
different reasons. Yeah.
I appreciate
So well done. And I lived in Beechwood Canyon, and I actually I lived in we renovated my friend's garage, and it was under their house. So I could really relate to like everything you
the same,
described.
man.
Yeah.
Everything's subterranean, man. And like you
Yeah.
get into the hills and it's weird because it's like, I mean, I like the houses are literally built into the side of these like super steep mountains, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, what's going to hold the house up? It's like another house or someone else. I mean, it's weird.
I,
I've asked you like a question. This is something I'm interested in. So when you lived in Hollywood, didn't you like work for, I read this in your biography, you worked for like, was it a director? Or,
yeah, I worked
remember,
for
like,
Ron Shelton, the director, and his wife Lolita Davidovich, the actor.
wow.
And it was great. They were wonderful. They were very good to me, and it was just nurturing. So yeah, it was really cool. And
It's a nice
yeah,
vibe.
and
Unexpectedly nice vibe from Hollywood, I would say. No.
no, seriously, very rare. And Lolita had never had an assistant before, and so she was like not precious about it, and she was almost embarrassed, so she would introduce me as her friend
Oh, that's so cute.
because she didn't want to be that way, like I have an
Yeah.
assistant. Yeah, so it was a really fun couple of years of my life, and I loved living in the Hollywood Hills. But you always describe place so well, but you describe how like dizzying it is, because
Yeah.
it is, and like how
It's a
you really
weird,
don't
yeah.
you
It's a
don't
weird.
want to walk the streets. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you definitely don't. Like I used to walk, so like Beachwood, I used to walk to like Lake Hollywood, right? Which is like super close, but like even it took me ages to even work out how to get there because
Yeah.
there's so many weird switchbacks, right? And the directions aren't very good. You don't get cell service.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no sidewalks. People drive kind of like crazy. It's like a one, like
Yeah.
almost like a one lane system. But like LA, that's the thing. It's like, well, I always wanted to live in LA. So like I like grew up in like San Diego. And like whenever I was a kid, so my parents are both from LA and my grandfather like lived in LA and we'd go visit him. And I wanted to be an actress when I was younger. So it's always my dream to like go live in LA. And then I tried first in my 20s and that was just like it was like a disaster. I was like living out of my car for like a couple of weeks and it was just horrible. Like I do not
Yeah.
understand it, right? So then I, lived in London, finally like came back a couple of years ago and like lived there for the first time. And it's like, it's so different than what you expect. And it's like really a city, I think, where it's like I say in the book, it's like, it can be the most beautiful city or the ugliest, depending on where you're standing. Like there's really like these different worlds that are like overlapping each other. And it's like, they almost don't really see each other. Like if you're like in this sort of wealthy, I mean, the houses like, that, are like in what Bel Air or in the hills or like how, they're so huge and you just get in your car and you shuttle to like one fancy restaurant or whatever. And you don't see like what's actually happening on the street, which is a
Yeah.
completely different thing. Right. So it's
Yes.
just, I feel like it's such an interesting city and I really wanted to like talk about that.
Yeah. And you captured that so well about how, they are two very different parallel worlds that usually never collide. And
Yeah.
it is just so true. And so I want to hear if you, however much you can talk about, since we're on the subject of LA, but yay, I know you adapt your work, and you're working on that right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm always like doing sort of like, I guess, different projects. So tomorrow I actually have the kickoff meeting for this. So like, I don't really know, obviously, like what all is going to happen. I think it'll kind of work out, you know, eventually. But like the really fun thing with this was like, initially, like we weren't even like, you know, we weren't even going to sell it. But then we had, well, you know who, like we're not allowed to say the people, so that's fine. But we had like this really amazing company, like kind of like circling. And so we were like, okay, well, let's take it out. And it was just so cool because I got to speak to like these production companies and studios and people who have made some of like the greatest sort of like film and television in the last few years, but also like people who have made some of like these like sort of classic films like from my childhood, you know what I mean? So it was just like this is probably the coolest thing that honestly has ever happened to me in my entire career. Like it was just so awesome. And like the cool thing too is like, when you speak to these people, like you get such different, like you get so much insight into your characters because it's like, they're all like so super intelligent. Another thing though that you realize is that everyone has different opinions. Like people see the same book, completely different ways. They'll see the complete opposite thing, even when you're talking about people whose job is storytelling. And I think that's like a really good reminder. Like, I think sometimes it's like, it's so easy like to read like the wrong review and get this impression of your work that is not necessarily true. It's just a perception. And somebody else might hold the exact opposite perception and just, you know, no one's right or wrong, you know? But yeah, it was just like a cool experience.
Well, congratulations. It's so well deserved. I mean, you've earned it, and your writing is so kick ass, and I can so see why it's going to be made for the screen because it's phenomenal.
Could you spell it out just a little more clearly, guys? What exactly is happening?
Basically what you do with making TV shows or films is like you sell an option, and there are so many different ways to get something made. So we're definitely not there yet, but this is why it takes forever, or sometimes it doesn't happen, is because everyone approaches it differently. So you can either start with like a production company, a studio, you know, essentially what you try to get is somebody to give you money and somebody to air it. So it's all this kind of big, long process. And some people approach it by attaching a director. Some people approach it by attaching an actor. So yeah, again, like we're not really allowed to talk about specifics just because it is kind of like a business thing. But what, you know, essentially will happen is we'll come up with a game plan. Well, what's the best way to approach this? Do we try to attach a talent? Do we try to write a script? Do we try to pitch? So yeah, it's just kind of, that's why we have to talk about it so vaguely, because it's just like, there's so much to it really.
So, but we're talking about Good Rich People specifically.
Yes.
Right, okay. Just wanted to make it clear for everybody watching it that, so you've had Hollywood interest in turning Good Rich People into what, long form television or a movie?
Yeah, TV show. Well, I've had interest in both, but I want to do a TV show.
You like the TV show better. Okay. And if that's all you can say, that's fine. I just wanted to sort of get everybody on the same page.
No worries.
I really have to jump in. Barbara, I really do love that jacket. I'm glad you're wearing it.
Oh, thank you. I wish you could see the whole thing. I can't. Pretty soon the puppy will want to, well, one of the puppies is going to want to come in and leap in my lap, and she's black, and then I'll disappear and it'll all be wonderful. Something I wanted to mention in this whole conversation, and you know, I grew up without social media. And I know particularly in the Hunting Wives, May, that, you know, social media and that community is really important to your character. And, you know, I didn't think anyone your age could write a book without allowing for all of that. Whereas people my age are still thinking, really? You know, I mean, I don't even do social media other than Instagram for the bookstore. So if I'm being doxxed somewhere, I don't care, because I'm never going to know, you know, it's not going to matter to me. But then I was fascinated with the Hunting Wives about how, you know, that was more real to her than real people around her a great deal of the time.
That's so true. That I never thought, I would never think to put it like that, but you're right. She was definitely in that space where that was more alive to her than what was going on in her own life at the moment.
And yet, you know, these people, you don't even know if they're real. I mean, you know, you see people doing Instagram and other things, they have curated lives. You don't know necessarily who they are, all the rest of it. And I I'm wondering, as we're all going along, is a virtual world going to become more real to us than the real world? If Mark Zuckerberg has his way and, we never go back to live events, and I spend the rest of my career talking to authors on, screens, although we've just done 3 or 4 live events, so they were really fun. You know, and as writers, you have to adapt to that, right? You have to write for that community.
You do. It's interesting. And in my Summer Darlings, the one that's coming out in May, I didn't feature social media as much. I'm not even sure. There might be 1 or 2 mentions because it was so much a part of the Hunting Wives, and I wanted to kind of get away from that. But it is challenging because, well, couldn't you just look up the mysterious stranger, on Facebook online? So I actually made that main character like so wealthy that he scrubbed himself from the internet, basically, which was, maybe I was being lazy, but it also suited his character. So I kind of got to, skirt that some. And
Sure. But, the opposite problem is that for some stories, you've got to figure out a way to sideline social media. It's, it's like there's so many good plots that are being ruined by modern technology. You can't really have the Lost Air plot anymore because DNA has blasted that away. And, we talked to Alifair Book about amnesia the other day, but, it used to be that you could have somebody wake up in a hospital room after an injury and nobody knew who they were, and the mystery kind of went from there. But now what do? They can bring in facial recognition, or they can take your DNA and put it in a database and find your family, or, as writers, it's really hard to keep up with this kind of thing. So, in your book, Eliza, what community did you overall envision when you started it? I mean, how cognizant were you of these different modern tropes floating around?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say, to be honest, I didn't really use social media because I don't think posh people really use it.
Or they have a person who does it for them.
Yeah, like when you're too rich, you don't need that kind of stuff, You don't want people to know who you are.
Well, I think to a great degree that's true. It's a really high risk thing, like to put your children, on social media, or to announce people you've gone to your vacation home in the Turks and Caicos when they think you're home in Beverly Hills. There's a lot of danger involved in it, isn't there?
Well, yeah, definitely.
So back to your book. Sorry, May, I interrupted. Carry on.
No, I love that. That's fascinating because I think, Elijah, you're right. Like posh people, I didn't really think about that, but yeah, they don't need it in the same way that. Yeah.
I mean, we're like snobby people in this book. But May, that actually doesn't remind me, but I did bring something out to make you more comfortable. You recognize this guy?
Oh my God, yes. Oh my gosh. Did you get that on a road trip here?
Yes, I love Texas. Remember I asked you places to go in Austin, but
yes, I love that. That's Barbara. Have you heard of the famous store? It's a convenience store called Buc-ee's in Texas.
Mm-hmm. I have. I've only been to Austin once. They had do you guys know about BoucherCon, the big mystery convention named after Anthony Boucher? And of course, it hasn't met live now for a couple of years, but they had a particularly interesting meeting in Austin. If it's going to be the city different, that's Santa Fe. Never mind. What is Austin called? There's some slogan for it.
I mean, live music capital of the world is one.
Whatever. Anyway, the convention there was different. For one thing, the guy that organized it didn't think that moderators were needed. I guess he had an idea that you could put a group of writers who didn't even know each other together in a room and somehow they'd figure it out. I can remember walking down the hall and authors would leap out of doors and grab me and say, quick, come in and start us, do something. I think I did 17 panels or something like that. I was like the itinerant moderator. And I thought it was all sort of in the spirit of Austin. But anyway, I don't know anything about Beechwood Canyon. So is it the geography that's so interesting, Elijah?
Well, I mean, it's basically just like the Hollywood Hills. Yeah, so it's like Beechwood Canyon is just like it's off of Beechwood Drive, and it's just like there's Hollywood itself, which is kind of, people always go to Hollywood like tourists, and they're like
Right.
expecting that it's gonna be really beautiful, and it's so ugly. But then there's just like these little, like Beechwood is just one of these little like kind of offshoots from that, and it has, it was built under the Hollywood sign, which used to be Hollywood
Right.
Land, right? So it's that real estate development that became Beechwood Canyon. And so they have a lot of like that old, like sort of storybook architecture. So like you go there and you feel like you're like seeing, like Snow White's house. Like they have this cute little village with like stones. And like that's one of the interesting things about Los Angeles, I feel like, as well, is that like people, like the architecture is so like diverse, right? Because people build these like obscure, weird, like cinematic fantasies, right? So there'll be like this like modern kind of like glass stuff, and then there'll be these storybook things, and then like Spanish architecture, like these just crazy mansions. Yeah, so it's just like this real kind of eclectic mix. And it's just sort of tucked away, but you're really close to Hollywood. Like you're, less than a mile away, right? So yeah, it's kind of an
There are two great things that come into play there. One, weather. I grew up in Chicago. You could no more build a San Diego beach house in Chicago and expect to make it through the winter than fly. And the other thing is that the geology of Southern California was never meant for all of this. It's not like solid rock. And so, you build all this stuff on really unstable land. And I've always thought if you were in a canyon, you'd have to be much more worried about the people above you, because, at any moment they could come sliding down on you.
The thing about Los Angeles is it's like a boom town, right? Like it
Yeah.
grew so fast that everything is kind of slightly unstable. And it's kind of at this, I mean, they don't even try to fix it. Like at this point, you know what I mean? Like it's just this very like oddly ramshackle place, but like sometimes if you squint, you're like, oh, this is beautiful, but you really have to squint.
Ramshackle is an excellent word for it, right? And the zoning laws are kind of a joke. It's true here in Phoenix too. I mean, because what happened is the developers bought one ranch after another. And so they did whatever they wanted with it. So there's no real good sense of community planning, it's all, and California is like that too, to a great degree.
Wait, so you're in Phoenix?
Mhm.
So my sister is a news reporter for Phoenix, I think for NBC.
Yeah,
Emma Jade is her name.
okay.
Maybe one day you might see her on the news. She's early morning, but she's doing an event with me on Wednesday at Warwick's. But yeah, she's lived
Nice.
for a long time, like, and all of her family are from there, like they're like, yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Well, Scottsdale is part of Metro Phoenix. It's, a bunch of communities. Actually, the biggest city geographically in the country. It's like fifth biggest in population, but there are no natural barriers. And soon we're just going to be part of Los Angeles. It's just marching across the desert towards LA. It's amazing.
So yeah, this is the thing. It's because like she's a news reporter, and I think it's like the fifth biggest news outlet in America, which people don't really think. But it's
and yet when I started the Poison Pen, I could not convince a single publicist in New York that it was worth sending an author here. There were no people who read, must have been mostly cows. I mean, I cannot tell you how much work it was to actually, it took 10 years to really kind of, get it to be a destination, because it just, I don't know what, it's fascinating to me. But now here we are doing all this. So tell us about the story of your book a little bit, kiddo. We haven't really talked about the plot. So just give us a quick summary. What happens?
Well, so what happens? Basically, it's about this like sort of extremely wealthy family that lives in they don't live in Beechwood Canyon. They probably live somewhere posher. And they're just bored. And to entertain themselves, they play games with other people's lives, which I think a lot of wealthy people do, but they just sort of actually kind of turn it into a sport. So they kind of set these people up in this guest house, and they try to find people that don't really have sort of friends or connections, so they can, not have any outside interference. And they basically conspire to try to ruin their lives, like in just like more and more extreme ways, right? So they're doing this. They invite this woman to come and live in the guest house, but by this sort of terrible accident, this other woman assumes her identity and moves into this guest house. And now she is the subject of their game, but she's kind of has her own sort of obviously reasons for being there and for reasons for wanting to stay there. So they all kind of like collides in this like extreme crazy party sort of game. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have to ask, how in the world did you plot this? I mean, it's so propulsive and it's so just, I mean, you really cannot stop turning the pages. Did you plot it out? Are you a pantser? What's your process like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like kind of like by accident. So I actually wrote like 2 other completely different versions of this book. And it just wasn't really working. Like it was much more based in, I think, like more grounded in reality initially, but I just didn't feel like it was a strong enough hook. So I had kind of had like all these little things. Like I had like Graham's birthday party, but in like the earliest version, they just went paintballing. Like they literally went. So I kind of just took all the elements that I already had and I tried to like turn them up to 11. So I'm like, what's more extreme than going paintballing? Well, what if they did it in their house? And like, what if they had this like gold dust kind of thing? And what if they completely destroyed like the entire house, right? So it was just kind of taking all that stuff and trying to make it like the most extreme possible. And I think because I had already written a kind of realistic version, like hopefully it's still like grounded in like those kind of details and like I said, like kind of like my own experiences or like people that I know, so that it doesn't like read, so it reads like almost believable, but also like just crazy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's the experience. Like it's like very keyed up, on steroids, but it's definitely still grounded. But wow, I mean,
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I traditionally I'm a pantser, but I usually will have like at least like 1 page like synopsis written up and maybe the 3-act structure, and then I kind of just go from there. I don't like to plot too much out.
I'm
But
similar to that. Like I'll try to know like where I'm going, like in quadrants.
yeah,
And it's like you really do want to always be open, because I think sometimes like your subconscious will make these kind of connections and stuff that you would never really have expected, but it's like, oh, this all comes together and this actually works. You know what I mean? And so you have to kind
yeah.
of be open, I think, to that, right? For me personally.
No, for me too. Anytime I try to plan it out, it's a failure for me. So I'm very much in like the Stephen King camp that stories are buried fossils and our job is to excavate them as carefully as possible. They're already there, they already exist. So yes, like let the subconscious do its job, which is the magic of it. And that I definitely, I have to gamble every time and hope that it comes together. But
in time as well, and like to like these, deadlines.
yes. Was it always from the 2 women's perspective?
Yeah.
Like, okay, it's awesome. Yeah.
I think honestly, the main thing that changed is that I introduced like the game element. And this is kind of another like interesting tidbit. So whenever I was living in this downstairs duplex, right? The upstairs was a couple, and one of them worked on the film Ready or Not, right? And so they went away to go film something else. I hadn't seen the film, and so I was like, oh, I can watch it now. Cause like I was afraid of watching it, because I was like, what if they can hear me up there? Right. I didn't want to, oh, she's watching, my movie. So I watched that though, and I was like, that kind of unlocked the sort of, I guess, like hook for me, because I was like, gosh, it's so, exactly what the stakes are. There's like a time clock. It's all that kind of stuff, right? She only has like 24 hours. She has to do this. And it's like, I was like, that's what's missing from my book. Like right now, it just kind of feels like these like people are just in conflict. There's no like, so that's how I came up with like, let's do the whole game thing. And I literally like pitched my editor like 5 weeks before my deadline, and she was like, yep, go for it. And then I like rewrote the entire book in like 5 weeks before Thanksgiving.
That's crazy. I remember you telling me that. But I hadn't read it by that point, obviously, but I remember you telling me that you did that. That's amazing.
Oh, I don't want to ever do it again, but I feel like people like now that they know you can do it, they're like, can you just, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
But I think you've come up with a really interesting way to do this, which is if you write, a first draft that, is kind of logical and grounded and makes sense, then you can use that to go crazy. and it still hangs together. I think it's hard just to be crazy without any kind of a map. But I think the way you've done it sounds like it would be a good working system.
Yeah, this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot too with the TV show, is like trying to think about your vision in terms of storytelling. And I do think that it's really important that you do ground your characters in some kind of reality, because I think
Yeah.
you see a lot of these shows where they're constantly trying to do something crazier and crazier because they want that water cooler moment. But if you don't have the characters being grounded in reality, then people are completely going to lose interest, right? And that's when you see these shows that start off good and then it's like they just completely lose it because they're so focused on getting that thing that people talk about that they forget who the characters are.
It's
So,
all
yeah,
about the click.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it is. That's what's wrong with the media too. They're so focused on the clicks, they forget to actually, tell the real story or report the facts all too often. And I think there are books that are being written just for the click. And they don't really hold up. They feel really hollow when you read them. Whereas if you have real people that you've created, then I think you can do it much more believably.
I feel like you kind of like you get to an interesting point, because this is something that I think about a lot, and I'm sure May, you think about a lot, is that we are as authors, we have to write things that we can sell. But we also want to write stuff that we care about. And so it's like, it can be very tricky sometimes to find where that intersects, because I think sometimes it's easy for me to come up with a really snappy idea that or maybe is similar to something else that's out there, but it's slightly different. But you really have to make sure that you care about it, because if you don't, it'll show through in the writing and you still won't be able to sell it. How do you juggle that, May?
No, it's really true. I'm about to be juggling it because I'm finishing up book 4, and there's another one. I'm gonna have to come up with another idea, and so I'm now like, wow, what is that gonna be? So I don't know how I juggle it. I think in the past, because it took me like I had maybe a tiny bit of backlog, but now it's different. I don't know. I feel like we're also kind of competing in a way with TV shows, even though it's great because we're inspired by them too. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, for me, I have to really be grabbed by the characters and the story, and there does have to be enough of a hook, because I know that if it's not keeping me up at night, there's no way I'm going to finish a whole draft of it. And there has to be enough unknown about it that I feel like I need to watch the story unfold, so yeah, it's crazy. I'm always like hoping something else comes to me that I want to write.
Do you think you find inspiration from life, or from other books, or from any other sort of creative medium, or is it just kind of like a mix of everything?
I think it's, for me, it's funny. My mom has inspired 3 of my books, either a story she's told me, or I know it's,
To hear that.
yeah, it's really cool. So I might need to call her and be like, okay, what's my next one? And then definitely other,
Love that. If I did.
definitely books I've read, like the one I'm writing now. It's dual narratives, and one of them is it's in second person, if I disappear. So I was very influenced by that book, by your book.
Oh,
Yeah. And and when I started out, I mean, I wasn't that aware of crime fiction. And so I went I read Gone Girl and Girl on a Train like everyone else. And I love those books. And those really did inspire me, though, to try my hand at it. How about you? What was one of your first books that you read that you wanted to I want to write a thriller now?
oh gosh. You know what? I think that the reason I ended up writing, I think my very first book, so I wrote YA books under my late husband's name as well, and they were thrillers already. So I was kind of always already doing that. And I think honestly, a big reason that I write thrillers is because I have anxiety. And it's gotten a lot more manageable now that I'm older, but part of my anxiety is constantly expecting the worst thing. I'll have if I leave my dog at my house, I'll have this kind of vision that something's happened to her and I'll be really, you know what I mean? And I have that all the time. Right. So when I'm writing these books, it's like a way to kind of get that out, because it's like you're always sort of like you're writing like the worst case scenario, right? Like there's a lot of even like passages, like even in this book, where I almost like talk about what it is like having anxiety, because like Demi kind of talks about it, like just always expecting the worst thing to happen. So I feel like that kind of is the reason I write thrillers. And then I tend to like find that the books that I can actually sell are the ones that do have like some kind of personal connection, like this one. Obviously, like I sort of spoke about, like having had my own sort of experiences, like, struggling with money, and now like having more money. Like I made more money when I first sold my first book. The deal was for more money than I would have made if I'd continued at my job I had in my entire life. Like that's like the extreme like level that I was, and that says more about how little I was making before, by the way, than it does about how much I made. But like that's like a true thing that happened to me, right? So I do have this kind of complicated relationship with money, and because of that, in a way.
Yeah.
So definitely like personal stuff. And then if I disappear, like I actually worked at a dude ranch that was completely like a very intense, psychologically like mental experience.
Wow.
Yeah. So like I definitely take stuff like from life, and I find that tends to like resonate more like than when I try to just do something. I think, oh, this is going to be trendy, or this is going to be cool. Like if I can't attach it to something real, people can tell I'm lying. I'm not good at like pretending, I guess, even though I'm writing fiction.
I love that. No, oh my gosh, I never thought. I probably write thrillers too, because I'm riddled with anxiety and I'm always thinking of the worst case scenario. And you're right. It's kind of like, it's channeling that, and it's fun.
It's therapeutic.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I think I've gotten better. Like I've gotten better with my anxiety. It's actually like bad for my writing.
I've just gotten more tired, so I can't care as much.
It's part of getting older, May. Sorry.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's partly that, but it's interesting because the kind of stories that you guys want to tell, you are forcing yourself with every book to do world building. You are forcing yourself to create a whole new world each time. A person writing a series has a different set of problems. They're entering into something that they're comfortable with, they've already created, and their problem is to keep it alive and not let it become overwhelmingly boring, because they've already been there. But for you guys, I can see how that it would make you anxious, hoping that you can come up with the idea for this next world building, whatever it is, operation. So you're more like George R.R. Martin than you are like, Raymond Chandler.
Yeah, I'll take that comparison. Yep.
Well, it's true, but that's obviously the kind of story that attracts you and that you want to write. But so there's goods and pluses. I mean, there's pluses and minuses, obviously, to doing it that way. One of you might eventually feel, that you've liked a character enough to write another book about it.
If
you might, or you might never.
Well, I would write a book about any of my characters I already have. If I could sell it, I would. 100%. That's the cool thing about do like a TV show, is that you work with a character for a long time, which I think is really appealing.
Yeah, the market at the moment favors this kind of storytelling, but it changes. There's always cycles in the marketplace. And, one of the questions people always ask me is, what's going to be the next big thing? And, the thing is, it's hard to see it until it happens, and then it's perfectly obvious. I mean, I could take you through the last 32 years of book selling and tell you when the next big thing appeared. And the only one I've gotten right is the new one, which is that I said the Gothic was going to be the next big thing about 2 years ago. And now it is. But, can I see past that? Not right at the moment. There are forces that shape the marketplace, and therefore the publisher's desire to meet that marketplace. That's very difficult to keep up with. It's kind of like futures in the stock market. You hope that when you bought soybeans, you were right, but what if instead it turns out to be corn? There you are.
I wish you could tell us, Barbara, what it's going to be so we could write it.
But she does make, because you say Gothic, I've been reading a lot lately, like in Publishers Weekly. This is like what they're trying. I don't know if it'll happen.
It's also a buzzword for reviewers. See, I think it's shorthand for once that gets started, people use it. You know, the most boring word of the last 2 years for me, you're never going to get it. So I'll just tell you, it's pivot. Because
Yes.
everything they want you to be able to pivot. If we do it live, no, you have to be able to pivot to this. You know, pivot used to be a perfectly good word. And now every time I hear it, I want to rip my hair out. You know, it's
too.
like, go away. And
Yes.
Gothic has become another, it's like a meme or something, you know, where it can be anything from Rebecca to Agatha Christie to, it's just, it's kind of a shorthand that everybody adopts. But the thing is, we'll all get tired of it. And so the question is, what's the next one? And I don't know. But you guys have hit a sweet spot in the marketplace as it is right now. You really have. So, you know, I find it fascinating. I really do.
Well, you know, good rich people, I have to tell everyone to, it's the most anticipated novel of 2022 by the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, Entertainment Weekly, Harper's Bazaar, and then today the New York Post put out that it's required reading. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, it is really so fresh. I mean, yeah, I'm honored to be in your company, Elijah, and it's exciting to be sort of writing these edgier, you know, kind of crazy, despicable, twisty books.
Fits the moment, doesn't it? It really does. Patrick, you want to come join us and see if there are questions from the audience, or you want to take your own dark and twisted mind, with which I am very familiar, and see what you can do with it?
Yeah, there are lots of people watching, and I've got some good questions here. Let me just look it up.
Next one is about Barbara's jacket.
Yeah, really. Let's see here. Okay, what's the hardest part of the writing process? Could probably ask both of you that question.
Do you want to go first, May, or would you like me to?
I'll go first. Editing. Editing is hard for me. I like drafting a lot, and sometimes editing's fun, and especially if a note really resonates with me. But I usually have that initial sort of ugh, you know. So I need to, yeah, maybe work on that. How about you?
Well, so this is the thing that's interesting, is because I think I would say it's definitely going to be different for everyone. But one of the things that I think is always hard, and I feel like this is hard, probably maybe hard for everyone. Tell me if it's hard for you. But I think to be able to, it's like writing a book, it's like a marathon. So I feel like to be able to just stick with it, something for that long, and like to be writing something and to know it's bad and to keep pushing, because well, I mean, I don't know if you don't like editing, but I feel like every first draft is bad. Like every first version of a book is bad. So you have to be able to keep working and see past that. You have to see what's not there yet for a very long time. And I feel like that's why it's so hard to write books. Like people, I don't think really necessarily realize that, because they think, oh, you'll just write the book and, you know, it'll be great immediately, but it's really not. So I think that is the hardest thing, is to be able to persevere when you're writing something that literally sucks.
Yeah.
Not literally, wait, words mean things. Sorry.
At what point in the process do you get that feeling, well, this doesn't suck anymore, this is turning into something really interesting?
Never. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, for me, probably like when I'm writing the third version of it, when I'm rewriting it for like the third or fourth times, and I'm like, no, I'm having fun. What about you, May?
It's definitely such a slog in the middle of a draft. So, you know, that middle point, it's just like, oh my God. And you're kind of so tired of your characters, and they sound like they're whining to you, and you feel like you're using the same phrases to describe how they exhale, and you just want to,
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then now, like, you know, when you get to that final like 50 pages, it's just, that's when I feel like it all comes together. And no matter what, you're going to type the ends, and even if it's the first draft or the 10th, it's just there's this momentum that happens, that it's like, oh my God, this is, you know, if it's good or bad, it's done for now.
I have a question, which is, when you go back and look at the draft for the second time or the third time, do you find that you have repeated phrases or repeated information because you were telling yourself the story, you know, and you needed to do that, but now that it's done, you need to get rid of it?
What do you say, May?
Oh, sometimes, yes, definitely. Sometimes the character has thought out loud that this person must be the murderer, and she's thought it maybe 3 times. And so I definitely have to go back for consistency's sake. How about you?
Yeah, no, I would say definitely like sometimes I do think like what Barbara says, like when you are at a, especially in the early drafts, you are kind of telling the story to yourself. So sometimes like you said, you're like really heavily foreshadowing.
Yes, yes.
I also,
I found it true editing that one of the things I had to do the most often was remove the stuff you'd already said, you know,
Yes.
in a first draft. And I understand that because, you know, I'm reading the whole thing in one gulp, whereas you have been doing it, you know, over a long period of time with stops and starts and all, and you can't always remember that you've already said or done that.
you know, a funny
you
thing
know,
that happens. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think a first draft is that, you know, you just have to get it down and get it out. But then all the fun comes from going back over it in both eliminating stuff and adding stuff, making it bolder or whatever it is you need to do. It's a work in progress. You know, you have to chip away at it for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was going to say is sometimes it's funny. I think when you're editing, you'll think of like this really great sentence and you'll type it up and you'll keep reading and you'll be like, oh, I already wrote that exact sentence.
Yes.
That ever happened to you?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I'm like, oh my,
Especially-
I'm a brilliant. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
no, wait. I just,
Yeah. Yes. No, it's embarrassing.
Do you find that you both have kind of like pet phrases that you subconsciously write over and over again? And the editor
so
says,
much. I have weird constructions that I use. It's hard when you edit because you start to like, it's like almost like what May says, the character is getting annoying, but it's me getting annoying because I'm like, really, this is not how you structure a sentence. And I structure every sentence that way. And I'm like, why?
That's an interesting question. Who is your favorite main character from any book you've read? Do you have a favorite protagonist?
Jesus.
Jesus?
I think he's really interesting.
Misunderstood.
Yeah, man, Prince of Peace. What's with all the guns? Like everyone, I don't know. People are fundamentally misunderstanding that book. Maybe, you know, reread.
Well, it's somebody named Brazier asking that question. So
That's my family.
yeah.
Somebody. I have 8 brothers and sisters. There's a lot of people that could be.
Wow.
Are there any favorite kind of protagonists that stick with you? And
May?
that's a tough one to be put on the spot with.
That's very tough, but I really not one in particular, but I really love Tana French's novels, and I know she's had a repeat female detective character, I think in a few.
The likeness.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, but yeah, for the likeness and maybe the
I know the character's
trespasser,
name.
I really liked her.
Is that the Dublin Murder Squad?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, she's in it. Like those are well, those are like likable characters. I mean, is that a thriller? I guess like a mystery, right? Like
Yeah.
Clarice Starling is like the only ever likable woman in thrillers, right?
Yeah.
Unlikable?
Yeah, well, fully likable. It's the only one that people don't really complain about. Although I'm sure someone does.
Sure.
Let's see. Well, a couple of related questions. Christina wants to know, what are you both currently reading? And then Lauren, who we know, says, are there any upcoming books that you're excited about besides your own new books?
Well, I have read May's new book and it's awesome, like super like in a similar vein to The Hunting Wives, but I would say it's like even more out there, like really fun, just like very dynamic, lots of different characters and sort of like her typical sort of like, well, not typical, this is your second book, but you know, it's like this bold, sexy, just outrageous, really fun. And then I'm also reading right now Ashley Winstead's next book. So she wrote In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife, which was another
Fabulous book.
Yes. And okay, so she is really good at writing. Like, so I've only read the first couple of chapters, and it's like she is able to weave so much into such a short space. Like, it's really inspiring. And it's like, I wish like I aspire to be able to be like that, because I feel like I don't know how she gets there, but she's like every editor's dream, because she does so much like with so little. So yeah, that's another book that I'm super excited about, is her next book, which is called The Last Housewife. And I think it comes out in the summer. Yes. You may.
Yes, Ashley's incredible, and thank you for the kind words about my summer darlings. And I just started reading One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, and it's already so fabulous. It's just, I don't want to say like Big Little Lies, Desperate Housewivesy, but it is kind of like that. It's set in like the posh part of Atlanta, and anyway, I don't want to give
your book, so that you've intrigued me.
yeah,
We've
no,
been asked to do an event for Geneva Rose, so you're going to be sorry you told me that, because I'm going to come and bug you to do it with me.
I would love it. I would love it. She's so great. Yeah, and I can already tell the book's super special. So, and
Right.
a recent book I read that I really love too, that's coming out in April, is The Lifeguards by Amanda Air Ward. And it's interesting because Amanda, it might be her first suspense novel, and she really pulled off something special. It's set in Austin, and it's about three teenage boys, and then a woman's body washes up on the green belt in Austin, and they're the summer lifeguards, and it's about the kind of the upscale neighborhood they live in, and how their parents protect them, and the women's friendships. It's very interesting. So.
Let's see here. Any other questions? What else we have here? Okay. Which characters in Good Rich People were the most interesting to write?
Probably my favorite to write were Margot and Graham, because they're like the craziest. Like, I found them really funny, but I guess they're also like just really evil. Because I kind of wrote this book, I should say. It's kind of like a Black comedy. So like, even though it's it is like grounded in the sort of reality, it's also is like that extreme, almost like Heather's kind of like, to me at least, that's kind of like how it's sort of intended to be read. So those characters were just fun, because like I could just go so out there, and they could say like the most sort of like horrible things, and it's just like, sometimes that's kind of fun.
Nice little outlet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a good way to take the piss out of rich people.
That's a great British expression, isn't it? Taking the piss.
It really
Right.
is.
I can tell you spent time in England because you say posh, which is
Yeah,
such a British word. It's not so American. It's a wonderful word. Do you know the origin of it, right?
No, I guess I don't know.
Oh, well, I can tell you, it all comes from the British sailing around Africa off to India, port out, starboard home, because that way you were not with the sun. So posh comes from the rich people took the cabins. So they're on the left of the ship sailing down the coast of Africa, and they're on the right of the ship, starboard home, coming back.
Oh
Is
my
that
God, I
right?
never have guessed.
POSH,
Oh my,
port out, starboard home.
crazy, man.
Wow.
I have a mind full of completely useless information.
You pulled me out.
That's great. No other real questions, just people, lots of people really excited about your book, Eliza, and
Wonderful.
lots of nice
Well,
comments.
Let me remind everybody that we have actual autographed copies of this book. And I think the cover, by the way, so let me get up here, is a really good looking book jacket. And we still have a couple of copies of autographed copies of The Hunting Wives, but it's also coming out in paperback, and highly recommended. So it's really been fun to talk to you. It's a great pleasure to meet you, Eliza, and wonderful to see you again, May. So, and I feel sure I'm going to see you again soon as I get around to reading Geneva Rose.
Great. Excellent.
So I'm glad you like it, because, I like to. Is it her first book?
No, it's so she had a real big breakout one called The Perfect Marriage, and She's also a TikTok phenomenon.
Oh, I know. I didn't realize I didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
I'm from there as well. I don't know why it's like because her name is with a J, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jen, like Jim.
But yeah, of course I know who that is. She's awesome.
Wonderful.
I do have
most
one
of-
last question for Eliza that just came in.
Oh, good.
Who is your favorite brother?
Oh, I have 5 brothers and I don't like even one of them.
Really dangerous to do this when you have so many siblings, isn't it? They can all like,
Like, you can draw a crowd pretty easily, right?
Whoever's watching is your favorite, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And only he'll know. It's between us.
wonderful. Well, thank you both very much for spending time with us. It was wonderful. It was really loads of fun. I want to thank all the rest of you for spending part of your evening with us. And since this program will live forever on Facebook and YouTube on our channels, and there'll be a podcast of it, feel free to spread the word. And I'll send you the links to all that so that you can share that around. So many thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for
Good night.
having us.
Our pleasure, believe me. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.